Good
Good
evening.
evening, Aunty. Good evening.
Welcome to yet another session of the new path. Already we are at the fifth chapter and inching closer to meet Master. But even these chapters where, before he meets Master also, there are a lot of insights, lot of things to contemplate on and, worth going through and understanding what made Swami Kriyananda who he was. The dedication, the loyalty to his guru, the dedication to the path to find God is something that all of us who are on the path is something to emulate and understand, observe. So before we start, as always, let us bring our hands in front of our hearts, invoking the presence of God and Gurus here with us. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, Guru Preceptors, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashayam, Swami Sri Yukteswarji, beloved Gurudev, Paramhansa Yogananda ji, saints and sages of all religions, dear friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow at thy feet. Great masters of Kriya Yoga, help us to understand these teachings better. Help us to tune into the insights, what you want us to learn from these pages, how to improve our understanding. Help us to walk this path of self-realization. Take us hand in hand. Introduce us to God. We are thine. Be thou eternally ours. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So, one chant, a short centering, and then we will start. sitting in silence, sitting up straight, spine tall, gazing up at the point between the eyebrows. Keep calling out to Guru Deva, to our line of Gurus, keeping our hearts open. Centering ourselves, bringing us completely into the session. The next 1 hour, being here, being now. Om Shanti Shanti. So the last chapter that we saw, he spoke a lot about a child's upbringing, right? The kind of schooling that needs to happen, where he was in that British school where without knowing, that is the main important thing that we discussed about Yama, Niyama, which Patanjali gave us as part of the 8 limbs of yoga, and which is a universal principle, right? These are universal principles that each one of us who are on the spiritual path, especially, have to follow if we want to progress and find God. But these are not just for those on a particular path or on a particular religion. As I said, these are universal principles. So whatever be your religion or sect or whatever, that is the only way of moral conduct. So that particular school where he was going in Britain seemed to follow it to a large degree without knowing that this is a very important thing for yoga also. And he goes on to say a lot of other things about what, how adults have to be always be careful, be aware around the children, because they're always watching us, and what they do or the attitudes they carry are to a large extent taken from the adults around them, especially the ones who are involved in their upbringing. So that is one thing that Master and Swamiji have taken keen interest, that these things need to start early. It is not only when we have finished our studies and done all the responsibilities, then we have to start thinking about how to be a better person. So the more if we inculcate these things as the children are growing up, it becomes a second nature for them to progress faster or be a good citizen of the world. So that is where we ended. Now, let us read this chapter. There are a lot of things in this chapter also. First, let us read with Swamiji, and then we will come back and discuss.
Chapter 5. The Storm Breaks. It was spring 1939. Dad, after 15 years in Romania, had risen to become head geologist for ESSO in Europe. Now he was being transferred to Zagreb, Yugoslavia, where there to become ESSO's exploration manager. All our belongings were packed and stored in Bucharest, ready for shipment. In March, Dad rented an apartment in The Hague, Holland, on Koninginnegracht. We spent our Easter vacation there. Fond memories of picturesque streets, acres of tulips, and smiling, friendly people. Summer came, and with it another visit to America. The weeks passed quietly for us as we visited relatives in Ohio and Oklahoma. August was about to close its ledger. It was time for us to return to Europe, So we entrained at Tulsa for New York. As we stepped out onto the station platform in Chicago, the headline struck us with all the force of a tall ocean wave: war. Hitler had invaded Poland. Hopes for peace had been smashed on rocks of hatred and national greed. To return now to a war-ravaged continent would be foolish. Dad was transferred to the head offices of ESSO at Rockefeller Center in New York City. Our belongings, packed and ready for shipment to Zagreb, had only to be rerouted to America. We settled eventually in the New York suburb of Scarsdale at 90 Bright Avenue in the Fox Meadow section. For the next 9 years, this was to be my home, or rather, my point of perennial departure. While I was still a small child, my parents had enrolled me at Kent School in Kent, Connecticut. This was a church school for boys run by Episcopalian monks. I was not scheduled to enter Kent for another year, however. Meanwhile, I was placed at Hackley, a boys' school near Tarrytown, New York. And now, the divine fisherman began once again to reel in his line determinedly. Looking back after all these years, it is easier for me to summon up a certain proper sense of gratitude to God for holding me so closely in check. At the time, however, I'm afraid gratitude was not my uppermost sentiment. A month earlier, my expectations had been bright. I was returning to the Downs for a happy final year there, surrounded by good friends. Now, suddenly, I found myself at 13, the youngest boy in the lowest grade of a high school, where the only familiar feature was my own perennial status as a foreigner. A status which, as a born American returning to live in his own country, I found particularly difficult. Even my accent, now English, set me apart from others. But whereas formerly in England, my American accent had occasioned little more than good-natured chaff, here my English accent marked me for derision. It took me at least a year to learn to talk American once again. I have never learned to do so perfectly. Heretofore, I had never in my life heard a dirty word. At Hackley, it seemed, once I'd been initiated into the new vocabulary, that I heard little else. In the past, swing music had been only an amusing pastime. Here it was practically a religion. Sex had never before figured in our conversations. Here it was virtually an obsession. Aggressive behavior, rudeness, insensitivity to others, as affirmations of one's own independence from them, these seemed to be the norms. School, so-called wisdom, included such precious advice as silence is golden and also healthy. The fact that I was just entering puberty made the problem of adjustment all the more difficult. In truth, I could see no good reason to adjust. Rather, I tended to enclose myself defensively within psychic walls, like a medieval town under siege. One or two of the boys were friendly to me, but to the others I seemed really an import, dumped on American soil quite unnecessarily, and considering the solid worth of the domestic article even presumptuously. In the room next to mine there was a boy of 15 named Tommy Maters, who weighed 220 pounds to my 107. Tommy was a bully. My English ways were to him an insult to the flag of America. It wasn't long before, dissatisfied with merely voicing his disapproval, he advanced to open threats. I'm not sure he was quite sane. One morning I awoke to see him peering in my window, an air pistol in his hand. As I leaped to safety behind my desk, a bullet struck the other side of it with a thud. What bothered Tommy about me, I think, was not only the implied insult of my un-American ways, but the fact that I wouldn't acknowledge my self-evident inferiority by cringing before him. Later that day, he made it a point to sit next to me at lunch, the better to express his opinions. Throughout the meal, he criticized my appearance, my vocabulary, my table manners. "Don't you know you should spoon your soup toward the far side of the bowl, peasant?" I paid no attention to him. Finally, he muttered, "Boy, am I going to get you." I knew he meant it. Back in my room after lunch, I pushed the dresser up against the door, which was without a lock. Tommy arrived shortly afterward, breathing threats. He rattled the doorknob, then leaned heavily against the door, puffing dire predictions with mounting fury. At last he succeeded in shoving the door open, rushed into the room like an enraged bull, and proceeded to beat me with such uncontrolled rage that it really seemed as if he wanted to kill me. "I'm going to throw you out that window," he panted again and again. We were 3 stories above the ground. Throughout the beating, he kept his voice low, for fear of attracting the attention of others on our floor. Somehow the ferocity of his whisper sounded more threatening than an angry shout. What could I do, small as I was? I lay motionless on the bed, face down, waiting for him to exhaust himself. "Why didn't you cry for help?" a friend asked me the next day. Because I wasn't afraid. Interestingly, the fact that I took Tommy's beating calmly and never thereafter altered my attitude toward him left him without another weapon to use against me. People commonly see physical victory as conclusive, but true victory is always mental. One's conqueror may feel conquered in turn by a spirit that he finds he cannot reach with physical weapons. Tommy from this time on gave me a wide berth. Though I was released now from his bullying, in other respects my life at Hackley grew no happier. I sought escape in the music room, where I practiced the piano for hours together. My unhappiness stirred me also for the first time to a longing for religion. Perhaps I thought I would become a missionary. I expressed these aspirations somewhat hesitantly to my cousin Betty when both of us were at my parents' home in Scarsdale. She was horrified. "Not a missionary, Don. There's too much to do in this world. You wouldn't want to bury yourself on some primitive island." The vigor of her reaction shook me in my still frail resolution. What, after all, did I really know about the missionary calling? Self-doubt was in any case becoming my own private hell. After a year at Hackley School, the time came for me to enter Kent. Kent is an Ivy League prep school. It ranks high scholastically and socially. I entered it with high hopes, but I soon found that the general interest of the boys here were essentially what they had been at Hackley, with the addition of a sort of all-for-God country in our school team spirit in which arrogance played the leading part. The Kent student was expected by his peers to embrace every social norm, to like or dislike all the right people, and to boast of his proficiency in all the right activities, particularly those related to sex and drinking. Woe betide that hapless youth who danced to a different piper. To laugh with the loudest, tell the dirtiest jokes, shout boisterously when merely passing the time of day, smile expansively at everyone. "Oh, hi, Don," in a bid to get others to like you. These were the banners of success. Conformity made one eligible for that supreme reward, popularity. Nonconformity exiled one to a limbo of disapproval and contempt. Experience had shown me that I had the ability to make friends, but what was I to do when, try as I might, I simply couldn't share the enthusiasms of my fellow students? It was not a question, as it had been in England, of relating to new realities on their own level. In England, principles at least had been concerned. Here I could find none, only egotism, selfishness, and self-interest. I might have been able to stand my ground firmly had I been able to outshout, outboast, and outlaugh others. As it was, being somewhat reserved by nature, I was unwilling to offer my ideas where I felt they were unwelcome. Instead, I became intensely introverted, miserable with myself, certain that my life was already at its outset a failure. In an environment that demanded absolute conformity, my inability to conform seemed like failure indeed. Gradually, it became as evident to others as it was already to me that I was simply one of that unfortunate breed of which the human race will ever produce its allotted few, a misfit, a general embarrassment, a creature of subnormal ability. Yet in my heart I knew this judgment was false. I tried my best to enter into the life of the school. I joined the school paper, reporting sports events with a hopeful heart. My first 2 articles, however, spelled my undoing. My humorous touch on so sacred a subject as sports was considered almost blasphemous. When I wrote that the fatness of the goalie was fortunate, for it made it more difficult for the ball, or the puck, I'm not sure which, to pass, the editor smiled with amusement, then appeased his conscience by withholding further assignments from me. I joined the debating society, but found I couldn't speak in defense of issues to which I wasn't sincerely committed. I became a member of the French club, but my fellow members were for the most part lonely outcasts like me. I played football, I rowed, I sang in the glee club. Nothing worked. There was almost a kind of shame in the few friendships I did form, a tacit understanding that ours was a companionship in rejection. At times I was actually afraid to leave a room full of boys, lest my departure give them the opportunity to talk against me. Nor were my fears groundless. I knew from the times when I stayed what uncomplimentary things they had to say about those less popular boys who happened to be absent. One day, after passing a couple of classmates on the stairway in our dormitory, I heard one of them, who obviously didn't care whether I heard him or not, laugh derisively. What a sad case. The worst of it was I had no clear grounds on which to refute him. During this gloomy period, religion might have been the comfort for me that it had been at Hackley. Kent was, after all, a church school, and most of the boys there were moderately religious. At least I recall none of them grumbling over their required attendance at worship services. But religion at Kent seemed as though preserved in formaldehyde, with the exception of one jolly elderly brother who taught no classes, and who was, I think, a little foolish. The monks seemed a joyless lot, uninspired and uninspiring in their calling. The church services were heavy with the consciousness that one went through all this simply because it was done. Religion at Kent inspired me to look almost anywhere but to God for solace and enlightenment. Soon I was seeking both of these fulfillments in the realm of ideas. Always a bookworm, I began diving into the worlds of James Fenimore Cooper, Sir Walter Scott, Keats, Shelley, Shaw, and other famous writers. At 14, I began writing a novel of my own. The influence of Cooper was evident in my setting. A pioneer family living on an isolated farm in Oklahoma was attacked by Red Indians. Only 2 boys escaped massacre by fleeing during the confusion. Earnestly, at this point, I counseled the reader not to think harshly of the Indians, quote, for they had been oppressed by the white man ever since he came to this continent, and had had their hunting grounds taken away and changed into towns and places of civilization. Nor must you think ill of their scalping methods, for this was just the custom among the Indians. And though we may think it cruel or repulsive, surely some of the things we do are just as bad, if not more so, end quote. The 2 boys escaped into a nearby forest, pursued by Indians. Deep in the forest, they discovered a cliff, scaled it to a high ledge, and there rested, thinking they'd arrived unobserved. Moments later, one of them happened to look down from their ledge, quote, and drew back in astonishment, For there, not 5 feet below him, was an Indian, and following him came 3 more, the last 2 carrying guns, but the other without them, for greater agility. Just then the foremost one heard him and uttered a word that would correspond to our word, shucks, for they had planned on a surprise, end quote. How often I've chuckled over that Indian's disappointed exclamation. The boys, having nowhere else to go, fled into a nearby cave. It led them down, down, deep beneath the surface of the earth, past unspeakable obstacles, including huge spiders in a stream that tried to block their progress and devour them. At last, to their amazement, they emerged into another world, inexplicably sunlit and beautiful. Here Indians and white men lived happily together in perfect brotherhood, hence the title of the novel, The Happy Hunting Grounds. All this was, of course, pure escapism. Yet it also reflected a feeling which I think comes to many people from time to time in their lives. The deep inner certainty that their true home is elsewhere, that they belong in heaven, and that the present world is only a proving ground for the soul. As Jesus said, "No man hath ascended up to heaven, but he that came down from heaven." This certainty is born not of speculation, but of deep astral memories that have become dimmed by more recent earthly experiences. Unhappiness and suffering are necessary for the soul's unfoldment. Without them, we might remain satisfied with petty fulfillments. Worse still, we might remain satisfied with ourselves. Footnote: because thou sayest, I am rich, and increased with goods, and have need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched, and miserable, and poor, and blind, and naked, I counsel thee to buy me gold, tried in the fire, and anoint thine eyes with eye salve, that thou mayest see. Revelations 3:17 and 18. My personal unhappiness at Kent School inspired me to ponder the sufferings of mankind everywhere. Could anything be done, I wondered, to improve the human lot? Surely if all men would truly accept one another as equals, they would be much happier. I worked out a laborious system of government in which no man possessed any personal property, all things being owned in common. Though I don't think I realized it at the time, my ideas were similar in several respects to those preached, though hardly practiced, under modern communism. But as I pondered the matter more deeply, I came to realize that most men are not capable of living in a voluntary state of non-possession. A few people, monks for instance, might be non-attached enough to consider nothing their own. But to force non-possession on humanity at large would be tyranny. Dictatorship, even in the name of the common weal, would inflict more abuses than it could alleviate. At this time also I wrote a one-act play titled The Peace Treaty. Its subtitle was Every Man for Himself. It was about a group of cavemen, tribal chieftains, who got together after a war to determine the conditions for peace. One of them, who, like all visionaries, was ahead of his time, proposed an idea that he claimed would banish war forevermore. His plan demanded a generous spirit of international cooperation among the different tribes to replace the intertribal rivalries and selfishness that had prevailed hitherto. The other chieftains professed great admiration for his ideas. It soon became clear, however, that they understood him not at all, for when it came to the question of what sacrifices each would have to make to ensure peace, each suggested a few, quote, minimal improvements in the original plan, with a view to getting as many concessions as possible for himself. The peace treaty was finally thrown out, as chieftains scrambled for whatever booty they could grab for themselves. At the close of the play, the hero soliloquized, quote, "If God existed, would he allow all this? But of course he exists. How could life have come onto this earth without him? Ah, I see it all now. Yes, God exists, but he wishes mankind to live under hard conditions, for it is only under such that man can prove himself worthy of the kingdom of heaven. End quote. God cares, I concluded, but wants man to earn his blessings, for without victory over greed, paradise itself would become but another battleground. Man, I was saying, is not perfectible through mere systems, but only by working conscientiously on himself. The play ended with blows and shouts off stage, followed by gunshots, then cannonades, then bombs, and finally one bomb mightier than all the rest, and then silence. The harsh reality of human greed was the stumbling block on which all my dreams of political salvation became shattered. At 15, I began writing another novel about a man who foresaw the destruction of modern civilization and decided to do what he could to preserve its most constructive elements. Far out into the wilderness he went, and there built a utopian community. Aiding him were experts in various fields, men and women who understood that expertise must be rooted in wisdom and love, not in mere knowledge. This little community kept the lamp of civilization burning, while the rest of humanity bummed itself back to the caves. The group then returned to their fellow men to teach them a better, more constructive way of life. The more I thought about my visionary community, the more compellingly it attracted me. From an escapist dream, my concept gradually evolved to a spreading network of intentional communities within the framework of present-day civilization. Someday, I resolved, I would start such a community myself. It isn't often that one's boyhood dreams become fulfilled later in life. With God's grace, this dream has been. That tale, however, must await the telling until a later chapter. I gave much thought also at Kent to the possibility of paranormal phenomena, prophecy, telepathy, and the mental control of objective events, and to the question of what life must be like after death. I wondered whether I might serve my fellow man better if I tried to develop extrasensory powers myself. But no, I decided, this whole subject was too remote from common experience to be widely meaningful. Instead, I would share with others through the written word whatever insights I gained into life's truths. By clear common sense, perhaps I would inspire in others a loftier vision. While I was mentally improving the world, however, my own little world was rapidly deteriorating. A few of the older boys evinced a positive dislike for me. Ineptness, I suppose they might have excused. Not everyone, after all, could hope to match them in their excellence. But while self-admittedly inept in their ways, I had gone on from this recognition of failure to develop other, to them inadmissible interests. Was not this implied rejection of their standards an unthinkable presumption? They began threatening openly to make my life really miserable next year, when a few of them would be returning to Kent as student body leaders. I felt I could take no more. In tears that summer, I pleaded with Mother to take me home. Stroking my head tenderly, she said, "I know, dear, I know. You're like your dad. He's always been shy when people didn't want what he had to give them. Yet he has so much to offer, and so do you. People haven't understood it, but never mind. Stay home now and live with us who love you. Here you'll be happy." What relief flooded my heart. I never saw Kent again. Who can say whether I might yet have coaxed a few useful lessons from its dreary walls? But I felt I had taken from them every blessing I possibly could. I was ready now, inwardly as well as outwardly, for a different kind of schooling.
So it has been a difficult time for him, where he talks about, so here, they are in an environment where the world is gearing up, or rather the war has broken out, the World War II. And in his own life also, he has been, just when he was settling down in one school, he's been pulled out. And he says, now on hindsight, he says that divine fisherman began once again to. So he sees a common thread through all the chapters till now that we have read, that God has been watching over him. So it's interesting, this thought, that if we were to look back on our lives to till the point that we have reached, some good, some bad, but if we look at it from the thought that, for us to reach this place where we have a guru, we are on a spiritual path, for us to reach this place, some things had to give, some things had to be compromised or sacrificed rather. And if we look at it as like, the guru is watching over us, he calls it divine fisherman. Guru, God is watching over us. After all, in Autobiography of a Yogi, we have read where Babaji, when Lahiri Mahashaya meets Babaji, and Babaji says, when he shows him the asan in the cave, he says, do you recognize that, Lahiri? He says, no, I don't. And Babaji says, that was your asan. You used to sit here and meditate till your karma took you away. And I have followed you through the astral world, where it took you beyond the death took you beyond in the other realm. I followed you. And then you were born in that little village in Bengal. And, where this, as a little boy, he used to bury himself till his neck inside the sand because it was right on the banks and all. He said, I have been watching over you. And throughout till, Lahiri Mahashaya went on to get married, have family. And when the time was right, Babaji ensured that he came to him. So it is for each one of us. If we actually look back on our lives, it does feel, where he says that, when I look back after all these years, it's easier for me to summon up a certain proper sense of gratitude to God for holding me so closely in check. So even the things that we thought that, because like here, he was supposed to go back to the school, which he started to like. He had a lot of friends. So, at that moment, he felt what injustice was that. But now when he's writing that book, he's realizing that there is so much of gratitude, because had it not been that, he would have been very happy, in that warmth of friends and a good schooling. He was going to be the leader, the head boy of that school. So somewhere, by depriving him of that, he was being pulled to something more important that he needed to do. And for us also, it's a good way to think back on all those disappointments and things that seemingly didn't seem to go well, is probably the reason we are all here. We sought an answer. We all felt that, probably this is not what it is. This is not how the world functions. There must be something more. And, each one of us came on this path. So everything, as Master said, look back on everything with gratitude. The good, the bad, everything has a good reason behind it. So similarly, he's talking about that. So here again, he comes in England, they were laughing at him for his American accent. Now here it's worse, because he is an American yet has a British accent. So the boys, the bullies, which seems to be again a very common thread in all the schools that he has been going through, and which was probably the time, the times were such difficult times, and that environment was kind of, for getting into even the schools and, the children going through all that, where these boys were feeling that, he was so not fit for this, and he was insulting their Americanness. And it was, this was also a time where America itself was pretty closed. There was lot of racial discrimination. The blacks were, not even included. They were slaves to the whites and all that. Imagine, this was the time Master went into America. Right? He went in 1920 when, right, this Swamiji writing, this is like, when the war had broken. He went to America. Here was this brown man in a, with long hair and, kesriya, this robe. He was wearing this long robe, which was so un-American, right? They were all in suits and all. And there were not many Indians there, and anybody of color was definitely not respected, even though what Master had to offer. So he went into that place because he was, it was his dispensation. This is what the line of gurus, Babaji had assigned him to Sri Yukteswar to be trained and then sent to the West, because now that we have ascended into Dwapar Yuga, so the world was ready. The West needed these teachings of ancient teachings of Kriya Yoga. So he was sent. He didn't have any friends in that country. How difficult it must have been. And I was seeing one of the talks of Naya Swami Asha, where she talks about, we do hear about all those stories of he went to Boston and there were room full, thousands of people who had come to listen to him. But then there were a lot of difficulties also that he had to face. But Master being Master, he didn't allow that to, phase him. He stood his ground. And so, what Swamiji is describing shows us the kind that the America that Yogananda had gone to, and yet, made a mark. And because then there were also those saintly people who were ready for the teachings, the ancient teachings from India, to help them grow and be part of this changing wave of energy that is ascending Dwapar Yuga. So again, this bully who has been troubling him, and I mean, imagine, actually physically harming him, bringing air pistols and trying to shoot at him and hitting him. But one thing is, Swamiji, he says that when somebody said, "Why didn't you cry for help?" He says, "Because I wasn't afraid." Even in the last chapter, when he talks about where he was attacked by this bully, he says it never changed his attitude towards, because what happens if something happens, then the person will either, become very fearful or they start hating that person. But Swamiji was very even-minded. Despite what was happening, he was completely even-minded. He wasn't scared. And he says nothing changed in his attitude toward him. And that boy couldn't take that as he goes. This is, again, a very important lesson. This is another weapon to use against me. People commonly see physical victory as conclusive, but true victory is always mental. This is such an important thing for us to understand. Once conqueror may feel conquered in turn by a spirit that he finds he cannot reach with physical weapons. We have seen that during our freedom struggle, like Mahatma Gandhi, who was following the principle of non-violence towards, he was trying to use it to the ultimate level. And a lot of times it so happened, all these gun-wielding soldiers, and the entire Indians would be without. They were armless, and yet even they would just keep walking towards them. A lot of them would be shot. But then it came to a place where those guys were not able to take it, because they were going on shooting, and these guys were completely unaffected. Because that spirit of we will win even without hitting back at you. They couldn't take it. It was a huge weapon that they had, and which is the world noticed it. The freedom struggle that we went through, and we have seen it in other. I mean, that was Mahatma Gandhi and the freedom fighters who had a very that junoon is what we can say. But we see it oftentimes, even in a simple cricket match, if you see that one side would have made a lot of things, and the other side, even though it is very strong team, kind of, even before they start playing, you can see it that, that spirit is gone. They are already given up on that match, and they do lose, even though they might have been a much more stronger team. So it's all about, the mind thing, the mind, what thought you carry in your mind is where ultimately decides whether you win or not win. And in this case, as he says, that Tommy from then on gave me a white bird, because he saw that there was no change. He wasn't scared. So, mentally, Swamiji might have been physically weak for him, but mentally he was much, much stronger than that boy. So again, he says that, and Hackley, he was not happy. And that suffering that he was going through, as a young boy, it kind of, he started looking for answers. The master often said that somebody who comes on the spiritual path, oftentimes it is suffering. If not in this lifetime, that soul would have suffered in its previous lifetimes, and would have started asking questions, would have started seeking an answer. And so, they come on the spiritual path. So Swamiji here, even when he was a very small boy, right, must have been 13, 14 years. He started seeking that. The first time he says a longing for a religion. He belonged to a religion with which he had no connect. He didn't feel any connect. The kind of religion that was being practiced at that time, right? And he says that when he said, I want to become a missionary, his cousin has a typical worldly reaction. She says, not a missionary, Don. There's too much to do in this world. And Swamiji, at that time, he was anyway unsure. The self-confidence wasn't there. So he's a self-doubt, in any case, became my own private hell. So the environment can, the circumstances where we are, the environment can put so much pressure, stress on a person, that even somebody as, charismatic leader like Swamiji, in his youth, in his young age, could go through all this. It's really sad that the world has come to this, right? And the next year he goes into Kent, which is supposedly a church, a school run by church. But yet, if we see everything is just the same. What he is mentioning about Hackley and the boys being, who they are. Only thing is probably they were attending this church mass every Sunday. Apart from that, nothing seems to have changed. There is this arrogance. There is this, very American arrogance that they were going through, the language, the dirty language, which he says that, unfortunately, this is coming to India also, right? If today's children we see, it is there. All this, what he is mentioning, doesn't seem like a new thing for us. Oh my God, American kids. It is right now even part of Indian schools, especially in urban countries, metros. All this is very common now here also. So probably is something that the education system needs some kind of overall change, where this thought is put into this, and that generation after generation can't go back in that way. Okay, so he's again here also, he says, you have to behave a certain way. That is when you will be accepted, or for you to be popular, you have to be loud, say dirty jokes, boisterous, and that is what is success. And he says, I couldn't, even though he knew this is what you had to do, but he didn't. He couldn't do it. Something that went completely against his nature, he didn't do it, right? And so he says that very sweetly, he says, I was unwilling to offer my ideas where I felt they were unwelcome. This again, Jayaji, Nayaswami Jaya used to always say, when anybody who would come, because most people start giving ideas and advice even when unsolicited, right? We think that in this situation, this person should do, so we give ideas, and And though that person doesn't like us giving, so we get very upset also that he didn't listen to us. Jayaji said that when anybody who would come to him with any problem, Jayaji would always say that, have you come to me to listen to your problem or for advice? He said, most of the time, people just want to, I mean, they come with an idea and they just want somebody to say, yeah, that's a very good idea. Nobody wants advice, is what he would say. And Swamiji, even as a young boy, he knew this. He knew intrinsically, he knew the human nature. So, and he was, I mean, he was far perceptive for his age, right? And next one, he says, this is the most sad part, where he says, I became intensely introverted, miserable with myself, certain that my life was already a failure. An environment that demanded absolute conformity, my inability to conform seemed like failure indeed. So this is what then drives, when this kind of environment is presented to people, drives people to depression and some suicidal tendencies and stress that they take. It is very real in this world today, right? Even for little children, and that's a scary part. So he says, gradually it became as evident to others as it was already to me that I was simply one of that unfortunate breed. So where he says it's becoming obvious to him, yet he says, in my heart, I knew that judgment was false. Swamiji, again, as I said, was way beyond his age. So as he once said, in one of his talks, he said, when I looked at the picture, and my picture of a young boy, when I look into my eyes, I mean, the picture in the picture, my eyes, I realize, oh, it's the same old fellow. So Swamiji was born, he was born Swamiji. So he says that, even at that time, it's the same old fellow, just the bodily, physically, he changed through the ages, but it was the same old fellow, same soul that's been traveling. So he says, these are the judgments that, outer world puts on us, and probably we also, depending on whether we have been able to handle it or not, start judging ourselves. Sometimes our own judgments are much more harsher than what others are judging. And Swamiji said that, most of the time, most people are wrong most of the time. And he also said that, we are all a bundle of self-definitions. So the moment we remove that, we are much more than what the outer circumstances are defining on us or trying to impose on us. The more we stay in our center and understand this, the more sorted we will be, right? So again, he goes on to talk about how he was trying to cope up with all that. And whatever, he says there was almost a kind of shame in the few friendships I did form, because most of them were children who couldn't belong to that popular lot. So they kind of banded together. So, and then were laughed at by people because other boys, because they felt that they don't belong there anymore. All this, he said, where the boys were moderately religious, even they were going through this. And he says that despite all this, the religion that was practiced at Kent, he says, was not something he wanted to belong to. He said, with the exception of, again, he goes back to that when, in chapter 2, I think he spoke about when he used to go to the Sunday Mass, and he always felt that there was no joy. That is again, the mark of probably one of the way we can judge whether, somebody who is on the spiritual path. And in Ananda, we find so much of joy. I mean, you look at the faces and you know that, there is joy. And that is one thing that really needs to be. He also talks about when his mother, he says that she lived it. She was joyful. And that is what attracts somebody right on the path, right? If I want to be in a path, and everybody seems very dry and so lost and so dull and worried. You don't want to be there, right? That is what he's talking about, that the monks who had given their life to Jesus Christ, or finding uh, the progressing in their spirituality, or the religion, probably not spirituality. He says that except one monk who was probably foolish, so he seemed more joyful. But the ones who were very serious on the path, he says the monks seemed a joyless lot, uninspired, uninspiring in their calling. The church services were heavy with the consciousness that one went through all this simply because it was done. You have to go through. I mean, this is what last week when Nayaswami Nitai had come for satsang, to give satsang at the center, he spoke about, the topic was religion versus spirituality. And he says that when he was a 7-year-old boy and he belonged to they were following Christianity in their house. He said his father used to work late nights and he couldn't go for Sunday mass. And it was always said that if you don't attend Sunday mass, then you will go to hell. Right? That the fear, it was all about fear, because it was very Kali Yuga way of following a religion. So he says, here I am, a 7-year-old boy, and his father was a very nice man. So he says, he's such a nice man. And the other side of my head was saying, but he doesn't go to Sunday mass, so probably he'll go to hell. So this is how the whole thing, it was done, as he's saying. People go to mass because it was done, because you go to hell if you don't go to Sunday mass. God is not going to judge us like that, right? That is where that we start questioning, does this really make sense to me? Do I really want to be a part of this? So he says that religion at Kent inspired me to look almost anywhere but to God for solace and enlightenment. And in all this seeking, he starts to write novels. And if you see the novels that he's talking about these Red Indians, where he's again, he's looking at it from a completely different way, a very compassionate way, where he says the Red Indians, that we can't, judge them harshly because their land has been taken away by these white men. So there's always this compassion that comes out. He's not judging any group as such, right? And he says that it's pure escapism, because somewhere he feels that, and in that story, particular story where he's that Red Indian, these boys run away, they go into that cave and then they come out, where he says at last, to their amazement, they emerge into another world, inexplicably sunlit and beautiful. Here, Indians and white men lived happily together in perfect brotherhood. So there was this ideal world that he was creating, which he says that probably this is escapism, but maybe not really. He was still in that, not a clear memory, but that feeling of being in that astral world where this is how it is, right? And that is where he says, yet it also reflected a feeling which I think comes to many people from time to time in their lives, the deep inner certainty that their true home is elsewhere. This is not where they belong. And that is why probably he always felt out of place amongst people, the worldly people. He felt he didn't belong here. So that is why probably the problems that he was getting into. So that they belong in heaven, and that the present world is only a proving ground for the soul. Again, he talks about unhappiness and suffering are necessary for the soul's unfoldment. Without them, we might remain satisfied with petty fulfillment. If there was no suffering, there is nothing to progress or look forward to, right? Buddha, that is why, Buddha's father always kept him in a cocooned in his kingdom, and didn't allow him to see the suffering outside. Once, when without his father's knowledge he went out, is when he saw that people were getting old, that people were dying, that people were unhappy, that people were frail and full of diseases. And that's when he started questioning. And then he says, oh, I don't want to belong to this world. Then he starts his quest, right? So either it's personal suffering, or he sees and then he says, "Oh, I don't want to be part of this. There's something else that must be the answer," and he goes away. And this point he says, so have unhappiness and suffering are necessary for soul's unfoldment. Without them, we might remain satisfied with petty fulfillments. So Swamiji writes, and I think in the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, where he writes this the story of this saint in India, whose meditation and tapasya was so. I mean, he was progressing a lot, and then one day this angel, a deva, comes in the golden chariot, as they say, and he says that the gods are pleased with your seva and your love for God. So you have been chosen, that you can now go in your body itself without having to drop this physical body. You can come to the astral world. He says, wow, that's very nice. He says, but then the saint says that I have always heard that this time is almost done. Okay, this story, and then I think there's not much. We will finish fast. Just 5 minutes more. So I have heard that every good thing, there is always a catch. So what is the catch? Now, the Deva is surprised. He says, well, you're a very peculiar guy. Nobody has asked me. People are very happy if we give this proposition. But he says, since you asked, I have to tell you. He says, it's beautiful out there. Everybody is like, the place is beautiful. People are very nice and everybody is enjoying there. But the catch is that, you don't progress there spiritually. So as long you stay there, as long as you want, or your karma allows you to, thousands of years or millions of years. But then if you want to progress, you again have to come back to earth and then do. The saint says, oh, that's very nice of you that you offered me, but listen, I don't want to go to a place where I still have to, at the end of the day, come back here. So I might as well stay here, finish off whatever learnings have to be done, and I want to go progress to that higher realm and be with God once and for all. So this planet, ultimately what the story tells is that when in that astral world, it might all be very nice, thousands of years we can live, but the point is there is no everything is so nice that there is nothing too challenging or for us to want something else. So when you see unhappiness around you or suffering around you, then you say, no, I don't want to be part of this. And that's when a person makes efforts to get out of it. So that is also needed. That's what this whole thing is about. Okay, then he talks about various things. Again and again, he says that, he's thinking about forming a community. Even at that age, he's saying, I wanted to form a community, and a community where, which he says that the modern communism talked about, but never, it never got implemented, where nobody is actually possessing anything, but it's part of the community. And he went on to create Ananda Village, where, some of these thoughts that he had have been put into effect. Okay. And he says, again, he's questioning, does God exist? I mean, where do you see a 13 or 14-year-old kid thinking about, does God exist? So you find that yearning, the deep yearning of, wanting to know God. He was not getting answers, but that was always there. Right from the start, there was always there. And the more he was suffering, the more that was coming forth, when he says, then finally he says that God tests, he wants to know whether you really want to love, you really love him, you really want him. So this coming from a 15-year-old boy, and he says, God cares, but wants man to earn his blessings. For without victory over greed, paradise itself would become another battleground, which is so true, right? Master used to say that, why doesn't God come to us so easily? Because he knows that the moment he comes, we will start arguing with him. So that's something similar that Master Swamiji said. And here in page 47, he says, another story he's writing, where he says, aiding him, that person, whoever the protagonist is, were experts in various fields, men and women who understood that expertise must be rooted in wisdom and love, not in mere knowledge. So these were like, he had this he was able to perceive a lot of truth even then as a young boy. And from an escapist dream, my concept gradually evolved into spreading network of intentional. He was always thinking of this. He was always thinking of network of intentional communities within the framework of present day civilization. Someday he resolved, I would start such a community, and he did. His dream, boyhood dream, did come true with God and Guru's grace. That's what he's saying. And he was always, whatever he was doing, when he's thinking, should I have paranormal phenomena, if I get those extra sensory powers, with, again, the whole point was, I might serve my fellow men better if I try to develop extra sensory. So it was always how to serve. That was also a very the paramount thing for him, how to serve, how to create communities which are conducive for people's development, spiritual, and where wisdom was there, love was there. So this was topmost on his mind. And then he talks about how he was finally taken out of Ken. So this is interesting that as a 15-year-old, when there were no communities as such in America, he was thinking of such a thing, of intentional communities that he's talking about, of people living together and creating a better environment, small, and then which goes on. And this master always spoke about it, that especially for those of us who are on the spiritual path, because when we are in the worldly existence, there are things that keep pulling us out. So it is good to live in a community of people wanting to the higher goals in life, and then helping each other to achieve that. And in the process, the world itself, if there are so many of these small communities together, they can the world consciousness of the world itself changes. And on this, where he talks about that this page, aiding him where experts in this little community, he says, kept the lamp of civilization burning while the rest of humanity bombed itself back to the caves. Swamiji also talks about this particular community that was in Hiroshima or Nagasaki, one of the places, when the whole town was bombed in the World War II. Nothing happened to that community. They were safe, even though they were right in that place, because of that community was a spiritual community. And so that is something to think about, that when people with higher aspirations, with higher consciousness, lot of love, wisdom, are living together, communing together to find God, it creates a kind of magnetism, an aura around them that nothing penetrates. Even bombs couldn't bomb them out. When the whole town, millions of people had died, they were safe. It's something to think about, that what this is satsanga, right? This is when we are coming on online also, as a group, coming together to talk of God, to talk of Guru, to be in this uplifted consciousness. We are creating that aura around each one of us, and which is, we saw this during COVID period also. There were meditations going on. We all went inside there. Each one of us came into our own houses, but we're connected online. There were meditations, there were prayers, there were so many things happening that kept the band of people together, and that aura uplifted. So that really helps. This really helps. The satsang, this being with the Guru Bhais, is very helpful. So I think it's thought that we all need to be very careful when we are living in this outside world, and that we do have a safe haven with each one of us as we are together. So any thoughts before we close the session? We are 10 minutes over the time.
Hi, just one thing, Jayanti, I wanted to share on the divine fisherman began his reel in his line. determinedly. It's a very powerful thing. So fisherman is actually sitting and not apparently not doing anything for a long time, and then suddenly he reads when he realizes the right time, and that's what probably our God, God is also doing with us. So he's waiting for the right moment to take us to the next level, to
Absolutely.
make us spiritually grow. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing. So thank you all. See you next week.
Thank you, Jansi. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Jayanti.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.